should be 100% of the black people should vote for Trump, because I did more for black people than any president other than Abraham Lincoln. It's true.
Just wait till Lyndon B. Johnson see you. Former President Donald Trump's wrestling theatrics were on full display during a recent campaign rally in Rome, Georgia, thrown by our own Capitol Hill Karen. I covered the rest of the event in its own video. And when he mocked Biden's stutter.
I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together.
But I'm here to talk about another recurring theme on the campaign trail, other than slurring, constantly comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln and touting how much he's done for black people. In this case, more than any other president other than Abraham Lincoln, who of course signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, what exactly has Trump done for black people?
I'm being indicted for you, the black population.
Apparently, he's being indicted for us. So there's that. You can't have any discussion around what Trump has done for black people without somebody yelling out, that's right, you heard it, criminal justice reform. Trump and criminal justice reform are the new "can I kick it? Yes, you can" when he gets around us. And you ever find that a bit odd? I mean, there's other things he could point to, but that one always leads the way. I wonder why.
The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population.
Well, if you only think of black people as walking, talking criminals, then that's all you need, right? Not housing, not healthcare, definitely not police reform, because let's be honest, they're just going to get themselves arrested again anyway. Help black people address the prisons. Well, in December of 2018, then President Trump did sign the First Step Act, a legislative measure heralded as making the most substantial changes in a generation to the tough on crime laws that had contributed to a 700% increase in the federal prison population since 1970. Thousands were released from federal prisons, benefiting from the law's good time credits designed to grant early release to well-behaved inmates. Additionally, hundreds have entered the elderly home confinement pilot program, allowing older federal inmates to serve the remainder of their terms in home confinement. Further still, thousands more inmates, 91% being black, had sentencing reductions due to the retroactive application of the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, a law passed during the Obama administration, which aimed to minimize sentencing disparities between crack and cocaine charges. However, the First Step Act was the result of years of congressional deliberation aimed at reducing the size of the federal prison population while ensuring public safety. The law essentially was a scaled down version of the Sentencing and Reform Corrections Act introduced in Congress in 2015 during Obama's term. Trump taking credit for Obama's work? No. And we all know that was a Congress that famously refused to work with Obama. And I wonder why. I mean, it's not like you would ever put the party over your country so you could take credit or anything.
Former President Trump has indicated to senators that he does not want us to solve the problem at the border. He wants to lay the blame for the border at Biden. And the idea that someone running for president would say, please hurt the country so I can blame my opponent and help my politics is a shocking development.
Trump consistently pops his collar for the lowest black and Hispanic unemployment rate in the history of our country.
Under President Trump, black families had record unemployment.
And the pre-pandemic black unemployment rate had indeed reached a historic low at 5.9% in May of 2018, continuing a decreasing trend in black unemployment that started under Obama. Further still, Biden had an even lower black unemployment rate than Trump and holds the current record. Then there are Trump's opportunity zones, which the first time I heard it sounded like Amsterdam from The Wire. The 2017 tax bill was said to encourage investment in disadvantaged communities. Yet a 2019 New York Times report reveals the program had primarily favored affluent investors instead of the community at large. The initial beneficiaries of the tax incentives are predominantly billionaires and members of the Trump family involved in projects like, quote, high-end apartment buildings and hotels, storage facilities with minimal employment, and student housing in vibrant college towns. In other words, gentrification. It sets up tax breaks to accelerate gentrification. I know gentrification when I see it. I grew up in DC. Unless that tax code included breaks for residents to afford to stay in those opportunity zones, you know exactly how that's going to go. The worst trap house from the DC I grew up in is hosting a spin class right now. In fact, let me finish this video because I got to head over there. Then there are the HBCUs, something I covered in my Tim Scott video. In 2019, Trump signed the Future Act that permanently provided $255 million in annual support for HBCUs that had lapsed after Congress didn't renew the funding. Biden made no changes to that commitment, and federal funding of HBCUs has increased every year under Biden to the tune of $2.7 billion in HBCU funding through the American Rescue Plan that was in addition to the annual funding increase. Furthermore, under Obama, the federal government invested more than $4 billion in HBCUs over 7 years. And that, my friends, is the case for Trump. I don't even have time to fully outline the case against Trump. That will have to be its own video. In fact, I should probably make that. But since you brought it up, household median income was higher for Black people before Trump. His administration had low rates of Black home ownership and low Black male labor force participation rates, and his inaction in addressing the coronavirus pandemic ravaged Black people all throughout 2020, exacerbating already existing inequities in our healthcare system. Then there was the fact that he bragged that 7 million people stopped receiving assistance through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, but didn't mention why, because they raised the requirements, which you can do when you resurrect that whole welfare queen trope from the Reagan era, which wasn't the only thing that he got from Reagan. And no, this is not about Nancy, although as somebody who grew up with the DARE program, that was quite the reveal. Trump reinstituted the Southern strategy to get elected, then kept pushing racist dog whistles throughout his presidency, culminating with the summer of 2020, where he met social unrest and calls for police reform, or at the very least, police oversight. You know, we would love if they would treat us like people, but we would settle for a couple of cameras and a supervisor. He met that with calls for law and order. Y'all remember that upside down Bible photo op? Yeah, that was great for Black people. Pledging to make America great again, hearkening back to a time pre-integration, and providing a legislative home for overt white supremacists. Yeah, we really do love that. That was all good for Black people. Meanwhile, because he did say more than every other president, Ulysses S. Grant created the Department of Justice and pushed for the prosecution of the Klan, behavior and attitudes that Trump at minimum enabled. Franklin Delano Roosevelt established the Fair Employment Practices Committee, and his Justice Department pushed for a repeal of the poll tax. Donald Trump pushed his to disqualify Black votes. It was Detroit and Philadelphia, wasn't it? Oh, Georgia too, right? Yeah, you can't forget Atlanta. Harry Truman desegregated the military. Barack Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, which has reduced racial disparities in healthcare. JFK set civil rights legislation in motion. Then Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act, and desegregated hospitals in the South through the Social Security Act amendments of 1965. He even convinced J. Edgar Hoover, who I did a whole video about, by the way, to stop being racist for a minute and focus on the Klan, or as some of us call it, domestic terrorism, or as Trump calls them, very fine people, apparently. I get it, though they vote too. But back to the civil rights legislation, which became the law of the land until a conservative Supreme Court started rolling back the gains of the civil rights era, which I know Trump sees as a major accomplishment. So to answer your question, no, Trump did not do more for black people than any president except for Lincoln. But I can say that he did more for black people than every president since Obama. That was actually pretty fun to research. And in fact, I think I want to put out a whole list. I'm gonna put out a whole list. The best and worst presidents for black people. Be on the lookout for both of those videos coming soon.